Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and this is my take on Judge Kavanaugh being appointed to the Supreme Court. Well, it's happened. The Senate has voted for him, and he's moving up to the Supreme Court. Well, been sworn in. So this is why it's so dreadful. You might have read Judge Kavanaugh's article about why it's a many splendid thing that he's now a Supreme Court justice. Obviously, it was completely self-centered. Me, flagrantly partisan. All right, it would be about him to some extent. But it's obviously a moist article, very self-pitying and egotistical. So yes, he is a real Trumpist. He could have moved on from all that, risen above the fray, something like that, and not be full of self-justification. Strikes me as overcompensation. So we'll go over the events of the past fortnight or so. So Donald Trump was going to put somebody new on the Supreme Court because someone is retiring, and the president can nominate someone to take the place of a retiring justice, or indeed a justice who has died. Remember, these judges on the Supreme Court serve for life. There is no retirement age, though they can choose to step aside if they wish to. They cannot be got rid of unless they commit a crime. So that's meant to give them judicial independence. The trouble is, the way they get there is highly political. Obviously, the president picks them, and the Senate has to accept or reject. So I can see certain logic saying, oh, well, that's more democratic, but then it brings them closer to public opinion, and public opinion is here and there and is necessarily about partisan opinion. I realise no system is perfect. Having judges recommend each other's and various committees and panels decide, perhaps that takes it too much away from the people and means there's an elite consensus. One would hope that those who are on the Supreme Court are people of the most unimpeachable integrity. They should be people of blameless reputation. Now, perhaps nobody's completely above criticism, but as close to it as you can. Now, I know their legal rulings might be controversial, but in other areas of their life, if they could avoid tendentious behaviour, that would be for the better. So there are some things which are disputed. Did he attempt to rape Dr. Christine Blasey Ford? Did he expose his penis to a woman when he was at Yale? Things like that. Maybe not in both cases. But things he definitely did do. He did drink quite heavily as an adolescent and into his 20s. I don't think it's disputed that he was in a bar brawl in his 20s. Things of that nature. Not becoming of a judge. These should be the most respectable people of all. They should be dull. Being boring is a virtue for them, I think. So it brings the court into disrepute. You may have seen his hearings before the Senate, where he was hostile. Obviously, he was being asked questions he didn't like, but it wasn't in a scathing tone. He was self-pitying. There was a catch in the voice. So emotional. The man has little self-discipline, which makes him unsuitable for the bench. There was a lump in his throat. His voice was cracking. There was such pathos about the way he spoke, mentioning all his female friends, as though this gives him credibility. Well, Snowflake seems to me, though he is an avowed conservative, and having to identify himself with a political ideology surely impugns his impartiality. He's openly partisan. I don't know, there are liberal left judges who are like that, perhaps not as bad as him. So he's obviously very eloquent, a distinguished jurist. But when he was questioned, his articulacy would suddenly desert him at certain moments. It was suspicious why, and his blink rate would speed up very greatly. And these are strong tells of lying. His cognitive load was too great. He couldn't handle it. He couldn't come up with plausible explanations. He was deceitful about his alcohol intake. The Devil's, Devil's Trio, something like that. What's that? He said it was a drinking game. I wish they'd probe him on that, right? So 3 people play it. What exactly happens? Which drinks did it involve? How many times did you play? Well, I should start with that one. Did you play once? Did you play several times? More than 10 times? And so you know very, very well if it's more than 10. And if you couldn't give the particulars, well, then it's not credible. Other people say it's a threesome, 2 men or 1 woman. Now, it doesn't bother me if he did that, as long as it's consensual. Would very much bother some of the Christian fundamentalists who make up the Republican base, especially if he's unrepentant. Was he lying under oath? That's a crime called perjury. Did he do that? Well, I'm not sure that he did. His accuser, she passed a polygraph test. He didn't take one. Now, I know they're not admissible in courts, but it certainly lends weight to her claim. and he could have submitted himself to one. Then his denial, if he passed it, would be more believable. So he is vigorously partisan, and he is a flagrant liar, saying Trump has consulted more widely than any other president. I wish he could substantiate that. Trump is notorious for disregarding expert advice, for not listening to expert advice, for not reading anything, for getting his information almost exclusively from Fox News, which is really just his PR agency. He's on a loop, this echo chamber. His views come back to him from Fox News, and he feeds into their narrative. So it was preposterous. So there he is, a Trump sycophant. And I haven't seen other judges. Brown knows the president's appointed them so much. He has impugned his own integrity by his behaviour, Judge Kavanaugh, that is. There was this botched and rushed FBI investigation of over and only 5 days. There were many witnesses who contacted the FBI were not spoken to. So that doesn't have any credibility at all. Why? Why this indecent haste? The Republicans were very eager to get him on the Supreme Court because they believe they will lose the midterm elections, which are only a month away. They probably will, but not by very much. How will this affect the midterm elections? If he had been thwarted, would that have infuriated the Republican base and actuated them more to vote? Or now that he's on, are they going to relax, or would see it as a victory? They'll be buoyed up. Could go either way. I'm unsure how to read psephology. So 3 people accused him, and Dr. Blasey Ford is clearly not nuts. I mean, she's a woman who's a woman of probity, so far as I can tell, never been accused of doing anything wrong, never sought publicity, not seeking money out of this, I don't think, has plenty of money. Credible. Fox News said she was credible. Donald Trump said she was credible before mocking her and saying she was a liar. So, she doesn't know who drove her to the party, can't remember that. Well, that's not a very memorable detail. Some things would be salient in your mind, such as someone trying to rape you would be rather more memorable than who drove the car. So what? Now, the Senate cannot convict or acquit someone of a crime. That would be ultra vires. What they can do is confirm someone's appointment to the Supreme Court or indeed block it. So things don't have to be proved to the criminal standard. It wasn't his liberty at stake. If they voted against him, he wasn't going to jail. They weren't depriving him of anything. He doesn't have the right to be on the Supreme Court. The Senate has the right to send him there or the right to stop him from getting onto the Supreme Court. They should have voted no if they had significant doubts. Now, any open-minded person would have serious doubts about him. I don't know the accusations are true. Is it 50-50? I mean, I would think it's a bit more over 50 that he did something wrong, even if it wasn't an attempted rape. Was it sexual assault? All 3 of them are lying. 3 against 1. You think on that basis alone, it would seem more like 75% he did something wrong. Okay, maybe it's less than that, but there have got to be grave doubts. The lying about his alcohol consumption, so he's clearly a heavy drinker. No shame in that, I used to be. But is he a heavy drinker now, as a judge? That would be a little bit more troubling. So if they have some significant doubts, they ought to have rejected him. Is he really the most honourable judge in America? I don't think so. Of all the people they could have put onto the Supreme Court, it's got to be him. And all right, it has to be a federal judge. It can't be someone who's just a state judge, I don't think. Or sometimes people who've even been lawyers have actually not been judges before. So someone with the very same jurisprudential philosophy could have been appointed to the Supreme Court. Just find someone who doesn't have so many skeletons in their closet. It ought to be someone who is reputable. So someone who's not culpable of anything. Doesn't have to be criminal, could be less than that, could be a civil wrong. They need to be more respectable than a politician. With politicians, we expect them to lie, and they mostly are dishonest. But he is supposed to set an example of the highest level of honesty, fair dealing, even-handedness, and clearly we haven't seen that. This is the highest accolade that the American judiciary can bestow. Well, okay, you can say it maybe come from the executive, the legislature, but is like almost the pinnacle of the American judicial system. The only thing that is to be Chief Justice, of course. So he is administering justice, and he can't be sleazier than some of the people he's ruling on. It undermines public faith in the whole legal system. It dishonours the law and the court that he's on. So he could yet be charged with crimes in relation to this, though I think it unlikely. Maybe more witnesses will come forward. People who were there, who saw it, can provide corroborative testimony, or more potential victims. If failing that, there could be civil suits where it only has to be proved on the balance of probabilities. and then he'd be really left with egg on his face, though I don't think that will have him removed from the bench. Anyway, it's a disgrace that he's got there. It's quite questionable that he's even a federal judge. There we are. So let him without sin cast the first stone. Well, I've never done any of the things that he's been accused of, and I'm not saying he necessarily did them. But heavy drinking, lying under oath, that in it on its own, even once, should completely disqualify him. But there we are. He was elected on an almost totally partisan basis. I think only one Democrat voting his way. And it disappoints me that more Republicans didn't have the courage to say, not sure about this. You don't have to be convinced that he did something wrong, but just don't like the smell in here. Just cannot place my trust in him. I'm not confident that he's the very best we've got. And they could say to the president, send us somebody else. They could have the very same outlook on all the issues, but please send us someone without such a questionable reputation.